Hello and welcome to this transfer pricing masterclass interview. And the focus of today's conversation is how to manage the transfer pricing aspects of M&A integration. So my name is Paul Sutton from LCN Legal, and I'm delighted to have as our special guest today Adnan Begic, who is the head of transfer pricing Asia Pacific for the Michelin Group. So welcome, Adnan. So the focus of this, as I mentioned, is really to get into the mind of someone like Adnan in terms of what you do when you're in the situation of being responsible for transfer pricing for a particular group. You're being told about a particular acquisition coming up. What do you do to scope out the work involved, and what are the particular pain points that you might need to avoid here? So Adnan, please can I ask you just to introduce yourself a little bit more and to set the scene as regards M&A activity.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very pleased to participate in this interview session and in this new series that you introduced. As you rightly pointed out, I look after the transfer pricing affairs for the Michelin Group across Asia Pacific, including all compliance, tax risk, TP risk management, audits, and of course integration of newly acquired company from a transfer pricing perspective. Now, when we talk about M&A activity from a TP perspective, if we just take a step back, we all know a lot of M&A activity happens for mainly two reasons: either for a company to grow through external acquisitions and also to diversify the offering from its core offerings. And if we talk about throughout the session about a buying company, which will be the main company that's purchasing a target and a target company, there will be the typical starting point is always the due diligence report. So when I hear that there is a new acquisition that we are going to help with the TP integration, I know that there is a tax due diligence report that looked at the target company. However, one of the issues that I always find with the tax due diligence report, they are purely focused on the target company. And they will ask some relevant questions, whether the TP documentation is in place of the target company, whether all transactions are covered in these TP documents, whether certain entities have sufficient substance. Everything very important that you need to know from as a buyer when you're looking at a target company, whether certain percentages are within the interquartile range, etc. However, what a due diligence report doesn't typically cover is how is the TP policy of the target aligned with a TP policy of the buyer? Are they somewhat similar? Are we going to integrate something that's completely different into an ecosystem that has a fundamentally or even slightly different TP policies? That can cause some real pain points when you get into the integration process, because you will get pressure from the top management to demonstrate certain synergies at the early stage, etc. So effective and efficient integration is really important. And if you can envisage some of the pain points early on, we will talk about some of the questions that should be raised once you hear that there is a new acquisition happening that will require TP integration.
Cool. Okay, thank you. So you've mentioned these broadly two scenarios. One is where the acquisition is core to the existing business of the acquiring group, and the other one where it is non-core, so it's diversification. Maybe you can just talk us through your thought process for each of those scenarios.
So maybe we can just start with an easier scenario. If a company if a buyer is looking at a target that's not part of the buyer's core business, the TP integration can be relatively straightforward. You can almost leave that acquired company run in a parallel if you don't have to integrate. So take a step back, when I say it's not part of your core business, target's products would not necessarily be distributed through buyers' existing distribution channels. So you are not trying to buy a company to leverage your distribution channels to push it into certain markets. So you have basically two companies running in parallel, maybe under a new business line that you manage. And even if the TP policies are not aligned, you can leave them and you can take more time to get some alignments over a period of couple of years. Now, where it gets tricky is if the buyer is buying a target that's core to their business. Let's say in a tire company like Michelin, you are buying a company that has service certain tires that we don't have in our portfolio. So we want to add that into our portfolio and ideally utilize our distribution channels to add that tire from a target to our customers and identify new customers. If you take a home appliances, for example, there is a company manufacturing refrigerators, washing machines, and dishwashers, and they buy a target that's an oven manufacturer. So it's obvious that you will also try to push those ovens through your existing distribution channels. That's where a lot of challenges can happen from the integration perspective if you have not even fundamentally, even if you have slightly different TP policies. So the key pain points, we will go into each of them in a little bit more details, is different transfer pricing policies. What I mean by that is if in one case, for example, the buying company has manufacturers set up as full-fledged, full-risk manufacturers, whereas the target company will have contract manufacturers. In the buying companies on the downstream side, you have maybe both have limited risk distributors, but in the buying entity, you may set your transfer prices operationally to get a certain target margin, whereas the target may just set them to be within a certain range. So there can be differences in different types of the value chain: upstream, midstream, downstream. Midstream, you may have regional headquarters or global headquarters that act as regional and global entrepreneurs, or just regional service providers getting a pure cost plus remuneration. And if you want to have integration of TP policies and a one common ecosystem with these two companies, there is a lot of work that needs to happen before you can get an alignment across all of these elements. Another big pain point, or maybe not so big pain point, is the level of detail of TP documentation. So what I mean by that is that sometimes you will have a target company that may have global TP documentation, but they just try to keep it at a very high level, OECD based type of documentation for all countries, and they would only localize it if there is an audit and a specific request, whereas the buying company may prefer to have localized, detailed TP documents in all jurisdictions where they operate. That's something that's very easily fixed, or that's not a big pain point. A biggie in this entire thing, and can sometimes be, I don't want to call it integration killer, but it can make the integration very difficult for the teams that are working on it, is if the ERP systems are not aligned. Mm-hmm. So if you have a target company and a buying company whose ERP systems cannot talk to each other, and you have the pressure to integrate and demonstrate synergies. Now, with the ERP systems, we will talk about some potential workarounds around that we have seen, but it doesn't mean that the buyer doesn't want to invest or doesn't want to invest in an ERP system. It just takes time to align ERP systems. It doesn't happen overnight. These IT projects sometimes can take several years, but the pressure to demonstrate certain synergies and start utilizing your distribution channels cannot wait until that ERP integration happens.
Right. Okay. So if I can just check that I've understood. So what we're saying, or part of the message, is that traditional M&A due diligence or TP due diligence on the target it's very much focused on the target as opposed to looking at it holistically with the acquirer in mind. So almost the first question you're going to ask yourself is, in terms of the target, can I just leave this to go along the same track from a TP perspective because it is a distinct business which is not being integrated heavily at this stage, or can I not defer that decision? And if it is something which needs to be integrated, then you're looking at high-level differences in TP policies. You're looking at high-level differences in the style of the TP policy, detailed versus specific, and then you're looking at ERP systems and how much pain is that going to put you through in terms of actually being under pressure to demonstrate synergies. So perhaps we can drill down onto the first pain point, which I guess is where there are significant differences between the TP policies between the entities.
So if you think about different TP policies, so let's assume your buyer has slightly different. We don't have to go into extreme. Let's just use a scenario where there are slight differences, and they can be from, again, at a downstream targeting a range versus a specific point. Maybe on a manufacturing side, it's a contract manufacturer versus full-fledged manufacturer. There are certain management service charges in place that are in one entity charged to all legal entities, be it manufacturer or distributor, whereas in the target company, they may be only charged to commercial entities, to the distributors, not the manufacturers. There may be royalty in places for use of the technology and IP. The royalty range may be different. And whether you need to align that royalty range is a question that's further down the line. But fundamentally, it's not a fundamentally different transfer pricing model, but it has certain differences that need to be aligned so that internal operational TP process can function properly in a way that the right margin ends up in the right entity at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So why is that important for example, for downstream, when you have target specific margin versus targeting a range? It will have an impact on your price setting methodology. It will help you impact on if you do monthly, quarterly target margin or margin tracking, and understanding whether certain price changes need to be done to achieve a certain margin. So if you have a process in place that at a buying company that manages that process for all entities, you want to align that process for the target company as well, if you want them to go through the same distribution channels. Now, if the buying company starts introducing, let's say an example, now we have a buying company's commercial entity in a country where the target company doesn't operate or hasn't operated in the past. And it's a great opportunity to demonstrate synergies, to say, now we will introduce the products of the target company into this market. We will utilize our distribution channels. Due diligence report said there are no tax transfer pricing issues, so it should be a walk in the park, everything easy. Then you realize, in order to set your operational transfer price through that process, you are what you want to achieve through setting the operational transfer price is that through the flow, the right margin ends up in the right entity. Now, our commercial entity is, let's say, targeting a specific figure, not a range. The manufacturer on the other side is not getting the residual profit. If the manufacturer is the target company, operating as a contract manufacturer, they will get a cost plus. So there is already a misalignment. How do we set the price in order to achieve a smooth flow of the right margin into the right entities? Before that happens, teams have to take a step back and see, is there something that we can align without having a big change? Like, can we agree that going forward, all entities are targeting a certain target margin? Can we agree that manufacturers, well, they may be contract manufacturers, but they will sell to a principal. Now, historically, the target company sold to the principal, can it change to sell directly to the commercial entities? If not, can our commercial entities buy from the new principal entity?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the ERP system comes into place. Even if you identify a lot of workarounds how to align the TP policies, and you are ready to place a purchase order at a commercial side or at a commercial entity, that purchase order cannot flow into the right manufacturer because the manufacturer of these new products has not aligned the ERP system with our, when I say our, I mean the buying company's ERP system. That's where one of the biggest pain points for the integration team kicks in. And it's one of the biggies around how we can find a solution before the ERP integration happens.
Mm-hmm.
How that works is often, unfortunately, a manual process. You have a commercial entity that needs, or a distributor that needs a product from a manufacturer, from a target company, and the ERP systems don't talk to each other. Unfortunately, that process then needs to be handled manually, which means that finance teams, operational transfer pricing team, supply chain, customs, the treasury team, they all have to be involved in a manual process. And everybody needs to be aware when typically, all these processes would be automatically triggered once a purchase order is made in the system. Now you need to have people on teams on both sides to be aligned. What are the action points once a manual purchase order comes through? Mm-hmm. It works fine with, one or two companies, two manufacturers, handful of distributors, everybody's aligned. But if it starts going into, 20, 25, 30 different type of transactions where you have manual purchase order management, manual transaction management, it gets really, really complicated from monitoring, margin tracking perspective. Often the teams would need to manually have a separate P&L for these manual transactions that are segregated from the normal traditional transactions that are done automatically. So you're basically adding an entirely new manual operational TP process on top of the existing somewhat automated process.
Right.
And traditionally, you wouldn't get additional resources to perform all of these functions. And, the certain teams will give you some pushback, and yes, we understand it needs to be done, but we cannot handle 25 different entities. So there is also a people part that needs to be managed with the expectations, like and commitment by the group to say, yes, there is ERP integration coming. It's a prioritized process. Hang in there for another year or however long it ever it takes. But it is very labor intensive, and of course, the monitoring process needs to be more diligent because human errors can occur very easily. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's really interesting. You mentioned the periods for ERP integration, and I'd just like to go slightly off piece and ask you about timescales generally. In terms of these issues that we've talked about, which of these issues would you want to nail down before the acquisition actually happens? Which would be absolutely critical things, and and to what extent can those issues be managed after the event?
ERP integration is for me the key, because if you don't have that, you need to coordinate with numerous teams on both ends of the value chain, upstream and downstream. If you have the ERP integration and you know about all of the other issues, you can centrally, in the central tax and transfer pricing and operational TP team, you can centrally manage that without too much involvement of other teams, even if it's not perfect. But we at least know what the issues are, and you don't have to explain to 50,000 other people. It's more contained in the operational TP spectrum. Of course, ERP integration is absolute key that I would recommend to start very early on. Ideally, if the target company and the buying company have the same ERP system, let's say both are on SAP or both are on Oracle, and then you have, even if both companies may have Oracle or SAP, there is certain level of integration that needs to happen. But a really painful one if it's neither the one nor the other, and it's completely two ERP systems in parallel. So you need to transform, let's say, the target company's ERP system completely into a from ABC to, I don't know, Oracle or SAP.
Okay. And can I ask you about legal entity integration as well? And because obviously, in many cases, when you're doing an acquisition, you end up with duplicate legal entities within each jurisdiction, and often there is an associated, inevitably there is some kind of associated legal process to weed out the duplicates and physically integrate the assets and people into the right entities. How would you regard that? Would you say, well, let's deal with that 2 years down the line. Let's focus on our sort of operational TP integration first. What's your usual view on this?
It is a process that happens in parallel. Of course, there is, when you have let's say, jurisdictions where you have both the buying and target companies, limited risk distributor or commercial presence. The big question is, should they be a merger, or should one all be eliminated, or how should we deal with it? But if you have both legal entities in a place, then you wouldn't necessarily look for these synergies that we talked about before, because the buyer's legal entity doesn't necessarily buy the products of the target entity. There is already an existing commercial entity, but it is a different question, and in many cases it will result in merger, or basically ending up with one legal entity in a country. So it doesn't happen overnight. There are different countries with different regulations and then different processes around that. But the target is not to have duplicative activities, and it's typically merger. Then you get again to the same operational TP problems once you need to buy from somebody who doesn't have your ERP system. Not to forget is the importance of intercompany agreements in all of this. It starts from the review of the target company and existing TP policies, whether the right intercompany. So that the legal team is always, as you can imagine, in any M&A activity, a legal team is heavily involved. Intercompany agreements, we all know the importance of intercompany agreements, and that when we anticipate a change in the TP policy, we need to anticipate also a change in intercompany agreements. And when new transactions are introduced with M&A activities, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of new intercompany transactions between different buyers and targets companies that would need to be substituted with an intercompany agreement. Now, these often need to be newly written to capture ideally what's so you need to find a balance, to capture what is happening today, which is not fully finished integration process. And you need to remember, once everything is integrated, hopefully, to relook at your intercompany agreements, whether they still fit the purpose of the final picture. Often intercompany agreements are put in place very quickly to tick off a box. We need to introduce this transaction, this management service fee, whatever. There is a royalty charge coming. Oh, we don't have an intercompany agreement. Quick, put one in place. Once everything is done and settled, there needs to be a review process to see whether everything is still matching the reality.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we come across a lot. You know, it's a classic risk point. Everything gets done in a hurry at that time, and then it gets forgotten about, and then 2 years later you look at it, and actually it hasn't kept up at all with what the group is doing. Great. Okay, so unfortunately we're running out of time in terms of this conversation. Could I ask you to leave viewers with one or two key points to remember when they're faced with this kind of situation?
Yeah, so for me, the key takeaway or the key learnings from a lot of the M&A activities is, one is, even if the tax due diligence report concludes transfer pricing, low risk, TP documentation in place, everything is fine of the target company, it is important to that the M&A team understands that it doesn't mean that the TP integration is going to be smooth. Mm-hmm. The M&A team needs to know early on whether there will be some pain points in the integration, and particularly secure funding and budget for ERP integration if needed, or if TP policies need to be aligned. That often comes with external advisors' cost. Sometimes if you change a manufacturer, let's say from a contract manufacturer to full-fledged manufacturer, or vice versa, it may come with immediate tax audits, potential exit charges. So this is something that needs to be envisaged early on in the process. So for me, the first thing that I think of when I hear that there is a new acquisition is, one, is it going to be part of the core business or not? If it's part of the core business, there are going to be some complications in integration, whatever the due diligence report says. Are the people in charge of the M&A, so there is always an M&A team that does the pre-integration work. Are they aware that integration may not be a walk in the park as everybody thinks, and that the synergies will just happen overnight? And have the right teams in place to help with the synergy, so that sorry, not synergy, with the integration. It needs to be formulated in if you're certain teams, we all have a day-to-day job, but every year you have certain projects with certain targets that you need to achieve. So it needs to be captured as something that as a team objective, if you want, to achieve for the year, so that everybody works towards it.
Fantastic. Great. Well, all that remains is for me to say thank you very much indeed, Adnan, for sharing your thoughts on it. It's a fascinating subject. It's not one that is often written about or talked about, so hopefully this will open the floodgates of people sharing their thoughts and opinions, and we can collectively help to raise standards. And if you, the viewer, have any questions or issues that you'd like us to cover, please do reach out. You can reach us at info@lcnlegal.com. I don't know if Adnan will be able to assist in replying to every question, but certainly, we'll reach out to him and ask if he can. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul. And if the viewers could just leave one, I have a question for the viewers, if they can in the comments leave one comment behind whether the M&A activity is typically managed internally by the internal tax teams, or whether companies rely on external advisors to assist with the M&A, with the TP integration after the acquisition.
Sure. Great question to end on. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Adnan. And that concludes this video. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.